Hi, I'm Kate Halverson, a Master Gardener. If you're watching this, it must mean that you're watching our first ever Master Gardener virtual general meeting that Tracy has set up for us since we can't all be together. I'm going to be talking today about cover crops, and I'm in my own backyard garden here in Camino. These are raised garden beds where I grow peppers, tomatoes, basil, and eggplant. And I've always done cover crops. I think they're great. And so today in the video, we'll just talk briefly about what they are, when to plant them, and why they work so well. Just as way of introduction, about 2 weeks ago, Tracy had about a dozen of us together on a conference call, and she said, "Can I have a volunteer, please, to talk about what's going on in your garden right now for our general meeting?" Well, the phone call, the meeting went real quiet for a while because what do we all have going on in our garden this time of year? Not much, sometimes just weeds. So I did volunteer that I have a cover crop that won't be cut down and worked into my garden for a couple weeks yet. So I got nominated to do this topic. So let's start out by talking about cover crops and what they are. Basically, in my case, it's a fall and winter cover that I put in the garden, just an easy to grow, economical crop to help improve the soil. These are fava beans that you're looking at. In the spring, these are going to be all cut down and worked into the soil about 2 weeks before I plant my veggie garden. Cover crops can also be done in the summertime if you're a winter gardener, and they can be done to help hold hillsides and for other reasons. But in my case, I use fava beans. Other cover crops can be grasses, such as clover, buckwheat, oats, vetch, or it could be legumes like my case of beans or peas. Why did I choose fava beans? I've done them every year. The main reason I chose them is because a master gardener said so. Albert Stevenson is another one of our master gardeners. He lives up the street about a block from me. And when I first started with raised garden beds, which he also has, he says, "Look at fava beans, these are great." And he was right. So I'm a master gardener that believes that if it works for your neighbor, it should work in your yard, and Albert was right. These are very resilient to weather. They're easy to plant. I'd say anywhere from 2 weeks to a month ago, these had a half a foot of snow and ice on them. I didn't even bother to cover them. I just let the snow go. If the snow melts and they pop right back up. So they're resilient, and they're a very easy crop for me to grow. And I would recommend, if you want to consider cover crops, try fava beans, try peas, or try some of the grasses. Rotate it, see what works best in your own garden. Timing is important with cover crops. So let's talk about when you plant cover crops and also when do you cut them down and work them into the soil. In my case, I only do a fall and winter cover crop for my spring veggie garden. So I plant in the fall, usually November or even into December, after my regular vegetable garden is done and I've cleared out all the old plants and sort of prepared the soil for seeds. Fava bean seeds are really cheap. I just put them down in the soil, about a half inch or so inch down into the soil, and leave it be. I let the winter rains provide the water for it. This year, of course, we didn't have a lot of winter rains in January and February. I probably wasn't as good as I should have been getting out here with a hose to provide water. So ideally, I would have had these fava beans being a little bit higher and maybe a little bit denser in here. I did have some birds steal some of them when they were little seedlings. So how many do I put in here? For a garden bed that's about 7 by 4 and another garden bed that's 4 by 4, this year I think I only had about 30 seeds that I bought from a packet. Normally I would have gone to our nursery and gotten about 1/3 of a pound out of bulk seeds. Those are even cheaper than buying seeds in an envelope. And our nursery closed, so I just had to scramble at the last minute and buy some seeds online. So I used about 30. I could have probably put a few more in here. But another way to think about when should you plant your fava beans is to sort of do backwards math. I normally like to plant my spring veggie garden around the middle of May or around Mother's Day is my timing for when I start my garden. You want to be able to cut your cover crop down about 2 weeks before you're planting your spring veggies. So do your math backwards from that. You want your fava beans to be flowering, and when they start to flower, you're not going to let them go into fruit or go into production of the beans. You're going to cut them down right when they're at a flowering stage. So do your backwards math to have cutting down of your cover crop, working it into your soil about 2 weeks before you're planting your veggie garden. It's critical that you do cut your crop down right at the flowering stage. We know as master gardeners, when the plant is starting to flower, it's working really hard to bring extra nitrogen and energy into those roots, because the roots are going to go hard to work to try and turn these flowers into the beans. So what we want to do is cut the cover crop down right as it's flowering. Don't allow it to go into the beans. And that is the prime time for the roots of your cover crop. And this one's not exactly ready. I mean, it's got a few flowers on it, but I'm going to do my best here to try and hold this up for a close-up and look to see little bubbles in here, little white bubbles off the roots. And that is actually nitrogen bubbles. And that's what's going to be left in the soil when you cut the cover crop down. You leave those nitrogen bubbles down in the soil, and that's what's going to be providing all that great nitrogen fixing in your garden soil, preparing it for your veggies that you're going to plant. What I do after I've cut it down, of course, you leave that down, work it in the soil. I just cut up the top of the plant into small pieces, and I work that into the soil too to put extra organic material into the soil. If you don't want to do that, you could always just cut the top of the plant and put the top in the compost soil as well. But just remember that when it gets to flowering and in full flower, time to cut. Those magic nitrogen bubbles are going to be down in that soil, just really working hard to get your soil ready for your summer veggies to go in about 2 weeks after that point. Okay, let's wrap up the presentation here with why fava beans are so great. I mean, I've already talked to you about how easy they are. In the case of fava beans, just throw the seeds in the soil. Same if you're doing grasses, you broadcast the seeds in the fall, let the winter rains go, boom, you're done until you're ready to cut them down. They're also cheap or economical. I mean, it doesn't cost much to buy your cover crop type seeds. And I also meant to mention that many of the nurseries sell cover crop seed packets all put together with the different grasses and legumes in them. So that's pretty convenient and economical too. But the last thing I want to end up with is the reason why I think you should try cover crops, if you haven't, is results. I have seen a visible difference in my veggie gardens the years I've cover cropped and the years I haven't. The ones that had a cover crop and the benefit of that improved soil, the vegetables were much more vigorous, they seemed to grow faster, the fruit was bigger, the tomatoes especially loved their cover crop. And I also noticed a lot less pests, like tomato hornworms. When I've cover cropped and I worked the soil and put the extra tops in the soil, I don't seem to get tomato hornworms. The years that I didn't, boy, those guys came out big time. So less pests, much bigger veggies. And I like to end with an example. I showed this at one of our Master Gardener classes and talking about the benefits of cover crops. these are sunflowers. They're old now, of course, because they've been dried. But these sunflowers were the same seeds, the same general area of the garden, so same sun, same water. But these, they're supposed to be mammoth sunflowers, not so mammoth, not so big. They just grew in our regular soil right next to a garden box that had the improved soil from a cover crop. And there is your mammoth sunflower. So cover crops or no cover crops, you can choose, but that's a very visible example of why I think the cover crops work well. That basically concludes my presentation, I think. I hope you've seen this is something that's easy to do and brings you big results in your garden. So if you haven't tried it, put it on your calendar for this fall when you're done with your veggie garden. Try your own cover crops. I'd love to hear how it works. And as your Master Gardener Communications Coordinator, I just want to remind everybody that we're on Instagram, Facebook, Pinterest, and Nextdoor. So if you're on those sites and you see our posts, it really helps if you like the post and you share it. It helps us get the word out. I want to give a shout out here at the end of the video to Tracy for setting up our first ever virtual general meeting. Tracy is the backbone and energizer bunny of our whole program. She not only keeps our training going, but she's a great help to the advisory board, to the demo garden, to our instructors, to our office staff. Tracy's everywhere. She makes everything happen, and thank you, Tracy. You're great. And the last person I want to thank is my husband, Jim. He's not only helping me with the video here, but if you don't know it, he's the one that does all the plant labels out in the Sherwood demo garden. He does these on his own home CNC mill that he uses as a hobby, but he's done 1,000 or more, hundreds and hundreds of these signs for all of our plants out at the Sherwood demo garden. So thank you, Jim, for helping with the video today, and I hope you learned something about cover crops.